Everyone wants to know which asset will save them when everything falls apart. Gold, the oldest store of value in human history. Bitcoin, the newest, born from the ashes of the last financial crisis. One has survived 5,000 years of empires, collapses, and wars. The other has existed for barely 15 years, yet already claims to be its digital heir. But here's the uncomfortable truth that neither gold bugs nor Bitcoin maximalists want to hear. Survival isn't about the asset, it's about the collapse. And history shows that what protects wealth in one crisis can be utterly useless in another. Welcome to the financial system. Control the money, control the history. And remember, simple is never easy. Gold's resume is beyond dispute. For more than 5 millennia, it has served as money, collateral, and a refuge when paper promises burn. The Romans paid legions in gold. The Byzantines built an empire on the Solitis. When Weimar Germany drowned in trillion-mark notes, those with gold bought entire apartment buildings for ounces. When currencies collapse, whether Roman denarii debased to copper or Confederate graybacks printed into oblivion, gold remains. It cannot be counterfeited, inflated, or created by central bank decree. Its value comes from scarcity baked into physics itself. No government meeting, no emergency act, no line of code changes the amount of gold that exists. And because of this, central banks today still hoard over 35,000 tons of it. A quiet admission that even in the age of digital money, they trust the metal more than they trust each other. But gold is not invincible. In 1933, at the depths of the Great Depression, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102, making it illegal for Americans to own gold in any significant quantity. Citizens were ordered to surrender their coins, their bullion, their savings, or face 10 years in prison and $10,000 in fines. The gold was confiscated at $20.67 per ounce. Then, once it was safely in government vaults, Roosevelt revalued it to $35. In a single stroke, the state had seized private wealth and devalued every dollar in circulation by over 40%. The lesson was brutal. Gold survives collapse, but it does not survive confiscation. Physical assets can be seized, hoarded, or made illegal overnight. And when governments get desperate enough, they will do exactly that. Bitcoin was born from that exact fear. On January 3, 2009, while the world was still reeling from the global financial crisis, an anonymous figure called Satoshi Nakamoto mined the first Bitcoin block. Embedded in that block was a message. The Times, 03 Jan 2009, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. It wasn't a timestamp, it was a manifesto. Bitcoin was designed as money that no government could print, no bank could freeze, and no border could stop. Its supply is capped at 21 million coins, a scarcity enforced not by geology, but by mathematics. And unlike gold, which sits in vaults and safety deposit boxes, vulnerable to search and seizure, Bitcoin can exist as nothing more than a memorized phrase in the mind of its holder. Confiscation requires access. Bitcoin makes access impossible. So, on paper, Bitcoin looks like the answer to gold's greatest weakness. But paper and reality are different things. And when real collapses happen, the two assets behave nothing alike. Consider Venezuela. Since 2018, hyperinflation has destroyed the bolivar, at times exceeding 1,000,000% annually. Salaries became worthless before they could be spent. Banks froze accounts. The financial system collapsed into barter, black markets, and desperation. In that chaos, Venezuelans turned to both gold and crypto. Gold, physical, untraceable, and universally accepted, became the currency of the wealthy. Bitcoin and stablecoins became the currency of the connected. Remittances flowed through crypto exchanges, bypassing government controls and confiscatory fees that ate up to 56% of traditional transfers. By 2025, nearly 10% of Venezuela's remittances arrived as cryptocurrency. Both assets worked, but for different people, in different ways, under different conditions. Lebanon tells a similar story. When the banking system froze in 2019, citizens discovered that their deposits were not savings, but loans they had made to insolvent banks. Withdrawals were capped, then blocked entirely. The Lebanese pound lost over 90% of its value. Middle-class families, doctors, engineers, people who had done everything right, watched their life savings evaporate. Gold, for those who had it, became a lifeline, but it was Bitcoin that allowed cross-border payments to continue, that let families receive support from abroad without the banking system taking its cut. The asset that worked was the asset that matched the problem. Gold survived the currency collapse. Bitcoin survived the banking collapse. This is the insight most people miss. Different collapses reward different preparations. If the crisis is inflation, currency printing, debt monetization, the slow erosion of purchasing power, gold has proven itself over millennia. Central banks can debase paper, but they cannot debase gold. If the crisis is institutional, bank freezes, capital controls, frozen accounts, then the asset that cannot be frozen wins. Bitcoin doesn't care if banks close their doors. It doesn't need permission to move. It doesn't require an intermediary to function. But Bitcoin has its own vulnerabilities. It requires electricity, internet access, and functioning devices. In Venezuela, rolling blackouts made mining impossible and transactions unreliable. In Lebanon, infrastructure collapse meant that even digital lifelines could flicker and die. Gold, by contrast, needs nothing but itself. It works in the dark, offline, during wars, famines, and grid failures. It works when the system isn't working. Bitcoin works when the system is working against you, but still functioning. And then there's volatility. During the COVID-19 crash of March 2020, Bitcoin fell nearly 50% in 48 hours, crashing alongside stocks, not against them. In 2022, when the Federal Reserve tightened policy, Bitcoin dropped over 70% from its highs. Gold, in those same periods, held steady or rose. It acted as the safe haven its 5,000-year history promised. Bitcoin acted like a high-risk technology bet, which, in many ways, it still is. The pattern is clear. In liquidity crises, when everyone rushes for cash, Bitcoin sells off first. In inflationary spirals, when cash itself becomes the problem, Bitcoin outperforms. After the 2020 crash, Bitcoin rose over 1,000% in 12 months. Gold rose 6%. Bitcoin rewards those who can stomach the volatility. Gold rewards those who cannot. So, which asset survives collapse? The honest answer is, it depends on the collapse. If governments debase their currencies, as Rome did, as Weimar did, as modern states continue to do, gold has outlasted them all. If institutions freeze accounts and seize assets, as FDR did, as Lebanon did, as desperate regimes always do, Bitcoin offers an escape that gold cannot. But if the power goes out, if infrastructure fails, if you cannot prove you hold your keys, Bitcoin becomes a string of numbers with no way to spend them. The real lesson isn't which asset is better. It's that survival is never about a single solution. The survivors of history weren't ideologues, they were pragmatists. They held gold when gold worked and found alternatives when gold was seized. They used Bitcoin when banks froze and bartered when grids collapsed. They diversified not by asset class but by failure mode. They asked not what will go up, but what will work when everything else breaks. Gold has survived every currency collapse in human history. Bitcoin has survived every institutional attack thrown at it in 15 years. Neither has survived the other's worst-case scenario. Gold has never faced a truly borderless, permissionless competitor, and Bitcoin has never faced a prolonged global infrastructure collapse. History hasn't tested them against each other. It has tested them against different enemies, and both have won their respective wars. But here is the deeper truth. Assets don't survive collapses. People do. The Venetian merchant who fled with gold sewn into his cloak survived. The Lebanese programmer who memorized his seed phrase and crossed a border with nothing survived. The farmer who grew food when money meant nothing survived. Assets are tools. They work when matched to the problem. They fail when the problem changes and the holder doesn't adapt. The question is never which asset is best. The question is which collapse you are preparing for. Gold is trust in physical scarcity. Bitcoin is trust in mathematical scarcity. Both are bets against the promises of governments and banks. Both assume that paper will eventually fail. And history suggests that bet is usually right. But how that failure arrives, slowly through inflation or suddenly through seizure, through currency collapse or institutional freeze, determines which tool you'll wish you had held. History doesn't repeat, but if you don't understand it, it'll cost you all the same. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. Its financial system in history leaves clues. I show you where the money leads.